With the end of the 5th generation of gaming, a new era was vastly approaching. In 2000, Sony released the PlayStation 2 to the world for the new millennium, filled with the promise of massive capabilities and pushing the gaming hardware like never before. It would go on to be one of the best-selling video game consoles in history, selling over 155 million units, with nearly 4,000 titles made since it launched. It also has one of the longest manufacturing runs for a game system, which spanned for 13 years, almost matching that of the Atari 2600, and this discontinuation came a month before the announcement of the PlayStation 4. For a game console to last almost 3 generations is really damn impressive. I remember the early games I played when it was brand new, as they performed completely different than what I was used to, given the fact that I was done with the N64. One of those early games that got my interest upon its release was Extermination. I first played this game as a demo on a Jampack disc, which was a series of game discs distributed by Sony for the PlayStation 1 and 2. They were usually given away for free or sold at very low prices in game stores. Each disc contained some demos to play for upcoming releases as well as trailers for various games. Back then, not many people went to game conventions or had technology like today to play or view these demos, so this was one of the solutions for us. These discs were pretty neat. The only downside to them was that when you've seen and played everything on the disc, they lose their replay value, especially when you've exhausted your favorite demo, making you yearn for the game even more. As the internet grew and with games becoming digital along with various advances, Jampack was immediately discontinued, but if it weren't for Jampack, I would have never come upon such games like Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper, Ratchet & Clank, Spyro, Siphon Filter, and Kingdom Hearts. My god, the trailer blew me away back then. It was so epic, I tell ya. In Extermination, you assume the role of U.S. Marine Dennis Riley, whom with other Marines are dispatched to Antarctica to intercept a distress call coming from the Fort Stewart research facility that has been overturned by contaminated bioweapons. Now the story is pretty generic. It does sound similar to John Carpenter's The Thing, and anyone familiar with the movie should know what to expect here. The game plays out as a 3D third-person shooter in a hostile environment. This game plays out like many survival horror games before Resident Evil 4, so you'll expect somewhat tanky controls, meaning you have to stop and shoot, though I would have liked the option to move and shoot simultaneously. Honestly, that's one of the factors that define the survival horror genre, forcing you to take your steps lightly to avoid certain death from the unknown. And given that the development team contains some of the guys that worked on Resident Evil and Mega Man, makes so much sense and has a charm. The game itself is pretty atmospheric, but not the kind that topped other survival horror games at the time. Throughout the game, you're tasked to infiltrate the overturned facility, taking out mutants as well as collecting items for natural progression, including your own survival. Your main weapon is a customizable SPR-4 assault rifle with a knife as your sidearm. You can increase the capabilities of your weapon with parts you find along the way, such as a shotgun, a grenade launcher, and even a flamethrower. Each of these weapons requires ammunition of their own and will become necessary against creatures unlike any you've ever seen. However, the monsters aren't your only concern for your survival. You have to be very healthy to escape the nightmare, meaning don't get infected, as the game has what's called an infection rate, a meter that increases when exposed to contamination. When the meter reaches 100%, your health drops to 60 at maximum and dwindles constantly. You can use health packs found throughout the facility to buy yourself time, but they won't stop the contamination. Things that didn't hurt you before or caused infection can now affect you, and if you fail to cure yourself with an antidote tablet in time and let the infection consume you, you deteriorate, and the death scene is pretty gruesome. Aside from the weapons and health, you'll also come across items and gear that will be key for your survival in the hope that the rest of your team survives the grueling experience. The fear intensity in Extermination is real. Most of the facility you traverse is pretty dark, so you're constantly stopping every so often to make sure you see what lies ahead, and the areas you've touched down in early events won't be the same when it comes to backtracking, and the ambiance can get creepy, typical for any survival horror game. This ambiance is strengthened by the well-composed soundtrack given the circumstances you're in, and for an early PS2 game, the music is really impressive. What's not impressive is the voice acting, and oh my god, is it bad. Not bad as the actors themselves or the way it's written, but how they acted out and utilize it. Ever since the first Resident Evil game, the survival horror genre follows an unusual tradition of dialogue so ungodly goofy to the point that it sounds like something out of a bad parody film. I mean, think of how many gamers back in the day were taken out of the mood when Barry spoke like a dunce or when Chris uttered a bad pun.
Yeah, so much for him. We got to the root of the problem.
Chris Redfield, everyone. While Extermination's dialogue is nowhere near as disastrous as Resident Evil, it still suffers from problems. For one thing, some of the voices are muffled beyond recognition that they're nearly impossible to understand without subtitles, especially with the Sonya character. Another downside is that the words at times don't match up with the duration the characters' mouths are open. Look, their lips don't have to be perfect, but at least have them match the time the words are first uttered to when they end. There are even lines that were meant to be said, but the characters don't say them at all, despite the subtitles saying otherwise, and this wasn't a constant issue I had with the disc. It's a real thing. On top of all that, the tone of the voice of the characters don't really match that of their situation, as they feel very calm and unrealistic, even when they hear the scream of death from a comrade.
That didn't sound too good.
That didn't sound too good, Dennis said. And if you think the voice acting in the NTSC version is laughable, the PAL version is even more ridiculous.
You're Special Forces, right? You came to destroy this compound?
Life comes pain. You gotta deal with it.
Look, Roger, I know you're right.
Despite the PAL cast being horrific, what ticks me off is that the sound perfectly matches the action in the cutscenes while there's a noticeable delay in the other version, like as though the track is 2 steps ahead. Even with that, you got all the sound effects from the gun blazing to your enemies attacking, which can get annoying if you can't find that one leech in the room. The graphics of Extermination is splendid, especially at the time it came out. The facility and open environment have a rich smoothness and polish, as well as the details being top-notch. Many would criticize the visuals for being so dark that you could barely see anything. To me, this is more of a personal opinion than a criticism, as this game genuinely reflects what an Antarctic base would look like in reality. Since this is a survival horror game, you shouldn't expect it to have the same color scheme as a fruit basket. Honestly, the darkness adds to the experience, and the shadows of the areas are well rendered. While the FMV cutscenes are alright, they're not impressive, nor are they anything to interact with. The modeling of the characters and enemies are extremely appealing, though they look a bit stiff and bulky. My personal complaint is that many of the items you pick up are represented as a gray box that can contain pretty much anything, whereas those same items have icons of their own when found. Some would say that they could be random item boxes, but this isn't the case no matter how many times you play the same area, and I find them odd and pointless to be implemented. Extermination also has one of the most consistent animations and frame rate you will ever find in a video game. It doesn't stutter in its pace, nor does it have trouble fast cutting between events. The only time you'll ever notice a bit of slowdown is with the final boss and performing a speed run if you choose to do such a bold task with this game, like, oh, I don't know, one particular individual? Name ringing any bells? None? No? Okay, moving on. The controls are simplistic at best, although they have a bit of a learning curve. It's nothing like the Resident Evil games, but there will be times when some struggles will come about, such as jumping, as they can vary depending on how far you leap, and I tend to find jumping at an angle carries you further. The worst place to jump is in the down plane as you climb on boxes to get out. Sometimes the jumping will be automatic, but you won't be at the right angle, thus falling repeatedly. The shooting is very responsive, and aiming is no hassle, but can be jittery, and there will be times when an enemy is in plain sight and you won't automatically lock onto it unless you're at a certain distance, and if they're in tight spaces, aiming will be irritating. The biggest criticism comes with not being able to move and shoot simultaneously. For classic Resident Evil games, it's understandable, but with a panic survival horror game like Extermination, it would have been a blessing to get more tactical, and performing a quick aim can be tricky. My personal criticism with the controls is not being able to slide down ladders. I just can't understand why it never occurred to the developers to utilize an ability that would make backtracking convenient. You'll also notice that the movement of the analog stick is extremely sensitive, that it leaves you very little room for error, especially walking on small platforms from a scary height. My only other gripe is when you get nabbed by a creature, there's no specific button to shake them off with, as you'll find that mashing buttons will be your best bet to reduce damage. As for how Extermination plays in general, it's a mixed opinion for anyone, to be honest. As expected in a 3D game such as this, there are issues with the camera. The noticeable flaw with it is that you can't control the camera manually. The only time it acts at your will is when you move and aim your weapon. This can lead to incidents when you round a corner and not see the dangers, which can give enemies enough time to react. In fact, the majority of the problems in the game involves the camera one way or another. Sometimes when you emerge from opening a door, you can get ambushed by someone in an obscure line of sight while the camera forces you to take a few steps forward before you can react. This also comes to play with the action commands. When you're climbing, jumping, and edging on a side, the camera will often be fixed in an awkward position that you'll be left judging how much further you need to go before reaching a point where you can switch from one pipe to another. As for action commands, like jumping and edging, they're not bad. The issue comes with the automatic commands. Sometimes, depending on the jump or how far the edge of something you're on, the game will automatically react by grabbing the ledge and jumping small gaps. There are some occasions where you will find that the auto jump is irritating, while other times they won't occur at all, and for grabbing the ledge, it's very risky to do since there's a 50-50 chance that you'll fall and hit the ground, potentially killing you. These parts would not be so bad if they incorporated the first-person perspective into these situations instead of just being limited to aiming. Despite these shortcomings, the game plays out really well and isn't bad once you get into the swing of things. Whether you prefer survival horror or action games, I would highly recommend giving this game a go, as it can be well worth your time. If you can look past the flaws that can ruin your experience, you'll find Extermination a very enjoyable game, and from the type of games I cover, it is indeed an obscure title, and obtaining a copy of it is easy and affordable. Even though elements of the game are dated by today's standards of the survival horror genre, it's still an exciting and atmospheric game that will leave an impression one way or another. So once again, thanks for tuning in. I'm Riley Sky, and until next time, I will catch you all later.